Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon. I wanted to do something different this week, partially because it's fun to mix it up, and partially because the video I'm working on morphed from a top 5 list into a top 20 list, and whoops, that's taking longer to finish. So I hope you're okay with a more chatty video today. This topic is also not exactly about JRPGs, or at least it applies to more than just JRPGs, so I hope that's not too off-putting. But it's on a collecting topic that will affect JRPG fans as much as it affects everyone else. I'm gonna say something that I know is going to tick off a lot of people in the collecting community, even some very good friends of mine. So please understand that I completely respect your opinions on this issue. But here's the thing for me. I'm not that upset about the inevitability of a digital-only future for games. Now, please don't misconstrue what I'm actually saying. I'm not saying I prefer a digital-only future. I definitely do not. The creaking shelves full of games behind me should be evidence of that. I think physical media is important. Having the entertainment you love in a tactile form is, in my opinion, the best way to express your appreciation for it. As console manufacturers start pushing more aggressively toward eliminating physical media altogether, we should definitely make our voices heard and delay the inevitable for as long as we can. But I'm also not ready to start mourning the good old days while they're still here, if that makes sense. These are my thoughts about the future and the present of game collecting. I may almost certainly be in the minority of the game collecting community, but I hope you'll at least hear me out, and I'd love to continue the discussion down in the comments. Barely a week goes by without some news that seems to portend the end of physical media. The PS5 Slim disk drive requires an internet connection to set up. Alan Wake 2 is digital only. These aren't good things, but at the same time, they don't mean as much as people think they do. I should clarify, they don't mean as much to me. I respect that everyone's feelings are going to be different. The PS5 Slim, for example, only requires an internet connection to assign the drive to the hardware, so it's a one-time check. Not ideal, and definitely doesn't make that device particularly friendly for the aftermarket. In a world where standard edition PS5s didn't exist, I think it would be a bigger deal to me than it is. But standard edition PS5s will just become the go-to for collectors, just like the original PS3 model is the collector's favorite because of all its backwards compatibility. Now, I know too that someday all the standard edition PS5s will stop working. Stuff breaks much quicker now than it used to because companies discovered planned obsolescence and it turned them all into kids in a candy store. But the same can be said of those PS5 Slims. Our Switches are going to break down eventually. Xbox fans, those Series X's will be paperweights one day. As it stands right now, we only have a limited amount of time to enjoy the games we own. We can learn to solder and get good with electronics so we can maintain our consoles as long as possible, but decay is real. Discs rot. All these games on the shelves behind me might be unplayable before the last piece of hardware stops working. I'll still appreciate the physicality of the media, but I think you'll agree with me that a non-working disc might as well not be a game at all. And that's because the physical media is not the game. I have a good friend who says, somewhat jokingly, that if a game doesn't have a physical release, it doesn't exist. Well, I say somewhat jokingly, but I think he's only like 10% kidding. I know a ton of collectors and even non-collectors feel similarly, even if they might put it a bit differently, but I don't see it that way myself. To me, the game is the experience I have with it. The physicality of the game is just one of the ways I express my appreciation for that experience. Now, the Alan Wake 2 thing is a bummer. No counter argument for me there. I hope some limited press company is able to release it. Honestly, I think that's the future of physical game collecting. A lot of people in the game collection community have problems with the limited press companies, especially limited run games, and there are a ton of very valid reasons that they feel that way. But in a future era where console manufacturers refuse to create hardware that takes media, we'll have to rely on these third-party companies to get the physical goods we enjoy. There's a lot of complicated legality around the issue, but based on my limited understanding, by using technology like FPGA, companies can get around issues of copyright by not replicating existing hardware, but instead emulating it. Analog has done this to pretty great success with things like the Super NT and the Analog Pocket. And maybe in the future, companies like Analog or Limited Run could produce consoles themselves that imitate the tech of the big consoles, but also take physical media, which, naturally, they would also produce. There's probably a decent amount of money to be made there. And even though it would be selling to a much smaller audience than Sony or Nintendo would want, they could charge a premium that collectors would be willing to pay. In a world where physical games are hard to come by, we'll have to decide to either leave collecting, leave gaming, or pay that premium. Now, I'm also not saying that I'm looking forward to that future. That's just putting the fate of our hobby in the hands of yet another company instead of leaving it with Sony and Nintendo. But if our choices are nothing and that, I think that's preferable. At stake too is preservation of the medium. We often talk about physical game collecting as a means of preserving games. This is true for a relatively short period of time, but like I said, one day all those physical discs will be unplayable. At that point, the preservation conversation comes to an end. The only way for games to be truly preserved is to create a way that we can continue to experience playing them long after the console manufacturers and the publishers have moved on. Think about how crazy it is that you can sit down in your living room and pull up any of like 15 different streaming services and watch almost any movie that has ever come out. You don't have to have a specific kind of TV or streaming device. They all work just fine. For any movie you can't find on those streaming services, you can usually hop onto the internet and find a DVD or a Blu-ray to buy. This is possible because film, unlike games, learned early on that multiple competing formats are not good for the customer. So while the format for movies released physically over the years has changed, from reels to VHS to DVD to Blu-ray to frickin' 4K UHD or whatever the heck they call it now, the movies themselves have always been made available on those new formats. And when they're not, the old formats tend to work just fine on the new machines. Obviously, except for VHS, but I think they did a pretty decent job of moving most movies from VHS to DVD back in the day. Now, am I saying something as crazy as Nintendo and Sony and Microsoft need to stop producing hardware altogether? Well, kind of. I know it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison, but the console wars have really only benefited the console manufacturers, so forcing the industry into a setup more similar to film would help us all out a ton. Sony or Nintendo can make machines with their own UI, sure, but games need to be more like films and that they can be played on anything by anyone. I'm so glad I don't have to buy a Sony Bravia just to watch the frickin' Last of Us HBO show. In the same way, I shouldn't have to buy a Nintendo to play Tears of the Kingdom. Set the games free. Of course, the film industry is going through a similar transition to digital only, so that particular problem remains. I don't know, I'm kind of rambling, but this stuff is just fun to talk about. I just think a standard format for all video games paves the way to a future where games are preserved, even if physical media is lost, and the walled garden approach that console manufacturers have created does the opposite. That's why I actually think what Limited Run is doing has the potential to be great for video game preservation. I don't mean them putting out physical versions of digital games that take a year to show up at your door. I'm talking about their Carbon engine. It's a proprietary system that takes in emulators and helps them to run on modern platforms. Theoretically, this could open the way for old games to run without issue on new hardware. If we're serious about game preservation, then we need to be supportive of the companies that are creating ways to allow us to seamlessly experience older games. At the end of the day, I'm a gamer way before I'm a collector, so I will continue to experience new games until the day I'm no longer able to. If and when physical games go away or become so limited that they're out of a reasonable price range, then I will play games digitally. It's totally fine if you feel differently. If you choose to exit the hobby at that point or focus on playing all the existing physical games, I think that's great. There's multiple lifetimes worth of great games out there already, so you will be plenty entertained. But I'm always going to want to see what new artists are creating, so I'm in it for the long haul, physical or not. What do you think? Do I have a point? Is that point just on the top of my head? Let me know down in the comments. If I haven't made you too angry, would you consider subscribing to the channel? I typically cover JRPGs and things of that nature, so this is a little bit outside my wheelhouse, but I hope you'll come back if you're into the things I usually talk about. Don't forget to like or dislike the video. Oh boy, I can't wait to see the dislike ratio on this one. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Until next time, bye. All these games on the shelves behind me might be unplayable. Might be unplayable.